So this might be a little bit rambling and cover a few different things really, which is part of the beauty of this second channel actually, which is one of the things that I want to talk about. This isn't really highly structured. I've just got about 6 headings that I want to cover, and that's all. I've just literally written the headings down. And I want to talk about a hangout with Kristi Winters and Kevin Logan, where they got onto the subject of physical chastisement of children, smacking children. That's really what I wanted to talk about. But a bit of a preamble to that, really. First off, as I say, I get a few comments about why I don't understand this second channel thing, and this is part of why I couldn't just do what I'm doing now, upload it and put it on my main channel. One, because I like things to be a bit more structured and organised, and the other is, and look like I've put a bit more fucking effort in, because I have put a bit more effort in, and 2, because it's just more grist to the bullshit mill, really. I think there's 2 types of response videos. There's response videos, you know, you see something that actually gets you thinking, and you make a productive response, critiquing and bringing arguments to the table. And then there's just the bullshit drama response videos, and this is edging part of this into that territory. And if you look at my output over the past 6 months, which admittedly has been less than the normal for reasons that a lot of you know about, nonetheless, the material I have done has, I think, if you look back, there's been a lot more original stuff and substantive response stuff, and less of the drama bullshit stuff. And so I'd rather portion a lot of that on this channel here. Not that it can't be interesting, but and Kevin Logan and Kristi Winters are 2 that, as far as I can see, have descended entirely into that mire, or 90% into that mire. If you look at Kristi's channel 3 years back, let's say, she was making lots of original productions. She just does fucking hangouts slagging people off now. That's really all she amounts to. She wonders why she isn't on stage and Richard Dawkins is. You know, why she is a woman not on stage and this man is. Yeah, and that's really all she does is talk about Carl Benjamin, etc., etc. But anyway, that's up to them. One thing they were talking about is this smacking thing. Let me just say that they always strike me as a really odd couple, because it's odd, really. There's not a lot I agree with them about, but I watch quite a few of their hangouts, largely because they're an hour long. I cycle to work, it takes an hour. They show up in my inbox. I think, well, that's an hour. That'll just play on the way to work, and I can argue with it in my head on the way to work. And I know, because it's often on Kristi's channel, I can't leave a comment anyway because I'm shadow blocked from a channel, so it doesn't matter that there's no, I can't leave, yeah, I know I can't leave a comment because I'm on my bike anyway. But they're a really odd couple, because Kristi, I've talked about the hypocrisy of she doesn't live up to her own standards anyway, so let's not go over that old ground. But it seems that, like, she has these things which she suggests of other people as sort of gold standards to live up to, and in some cases demands of other people. These ideas of the classic thing, a line she used, of robust feminist argument. Find the best arguments. You know, don't argue against the weakest arguments of your opposition. Argue against the strongest. And the principle of charity, that look for the best, the strongest interpretation of your opponent's argument, not the weakest. Don't rely on ad hominems, right? Provide an actual argument rather than just abusing the person you're talking about. And then finally, that which can be dismissed, Hitchens' razor, that can be, which is asserted without evidence, can be dismissed without evidence. And the interesting thing with those is, there are people as bad as Kevin Logan, but I don't know that there's anybody worse than Kevin Logan. I think that in those for criteria, Kevin Logan is as bad as it gets. I don't know what Kevin Logan would think of that, whether he'd agree with that, but he certainly doesn't go looking for the strongest arguments of his opponents. He picks out, what is the weakest thing that I can find that I can make a video about? Or when he makes these videos, descent into the manosphere, descent of manosphere is descent of man, isn't it? Obviously, descent of manosphere. And I watched a couple of them. I mean, they're quite a remarkable productions. He spends, to his credit, he obviously spends quite a lot of time watching videos of the person he's responding to make those videos. It's quite an investment of effort, actually, to do that. And then to work out all the best bits. It's quite a, as a YouTuber, I can appreciate there's some art in that. But really all he's doing is trying to find the very most face palming or most outrageous things the person has said. There's no sort of interest in what are the strongest things they've made. Have they ever made any good arguments? It's very much portraying a person from their worst aspect. There's no principle of charity whatsoever. It's very much a case of what is the worst spin, what is the worst possible, what's the most cynical understanding I can have of what that person has said. If there is possibly a racist or sexist interpretation, let's just assume it's that one and say racist as fuck, right? And that's all that it amounts to. It's a tirade of ad hominems from start to finish, and again accusations of racism and sexism often entirely unevidenced, or a piece of evidence is shown, but then it's not like walking around with a swastika flag. It's something that almost he presents and says, there you go, that's clear-cut racism, when you think, well, hang on, you really need to discuss that. You need to be a boring cunt, maybe like I am, and sort of discuss why you're making that claim, given that. But same as you would in a fucking court of law, or you would if you was on the television, or if you would be doing anything properly. It requires a little bit of discussion and analysis, and for you to back up what you're saying. None of that takes place, and it always intrigues me that they're almost like a sort of YouTube couple. Very, very tight-knit, those two. They do loads and loads of work together. And it's almost as if all the things that Kristi Winters lauds and says, this is what everybody should be like, Kevin Logan just goes, fuck that, to a lot of them. Bollocks to that, right? I'm just going to call people racist, sexist cunts, take the piss out of them, make personal abuse, do all these different things, not really bother with evidence, just take the worst possible interpretation of all their arguments. And Kristi's like, carry on, Kev. It's great when you do it. It just seems really, really so obvious, the disparity there, that I've always found that kind of interesting. But anyway, look, to get on with the meat of this video, they'd made this hangout and they were talking about smacking, physical chastisement of children, and that was really what I wanted to talk about. And we all have different opinions on it. I will let you know as the rest of this video transpires where I kind of stand on this. They had their opinion. I found it kind of interesting from the outset that they were talking about this, because you can imagine if this was a hangout with two men, especially if it was two white straight men, let's say, because that would immediately set the alarm bells ringing. But if it was two men and they were talking about abortion and they were reviewing it, they would immediately scoff at the fact, here are two men, why isn't there a woman in the discussion, right? They think that they know it all about abortion, they could never have an abortion. And yet here were two people who have never had children discussing parenting and how you should parent, which I found kind of amusing, without any real acknowledgement of the fact that that's what, who the fuck are they to know? Now that's not my position, because I don't believe you need to have been a parent to discuss parenting. You don't need to have had an abortion or be a woman to have a position on that. It impacts on everybody. We can all understand the circumstances around it. And indeed, both with regard to having a child or having an abortion, in fact, going through those things can prejudice you somewhat if you're not aware of that, in that you can end up viewing your particular instance, your particular experience, as the general experience. Well, I had a child, that's how I brought my child up, and it works perfectly, so that's how everybody should bring their child up. Whereas if you speak to somebody who's had half a dozen fucking children, apart from the fact that they're knackered, right, and they look like they're 80 by the time they're 40, they'll tell you that, the first three children, you bring them up a certain way, and the next child's just, because they're all different characters, it's all different, the next child just doesn't work. And it's the same with abortions. Everybody has abortions for certain reasons, and it affects them in certain ways, and you can't extrapolate that to everybody's experience. But anyway, that just kind of intrigued me, that. But what they'd started off with, they talked about this this school in America. And I was right on board with what they said about the specifics of the school. It sounded quite horrendous. They'd sent a letter to all the parents saying that they wanted to start paddling the children, hitting them with a wooden paddle as a punishment. And they detailed the dimensions of the paddle and how it would be administered, and tried to allay the parents' fears by saying, don't worry, we'll paddle them in private, locked away in an office with just a schoolmaster. As if, yeah, well, that's okay, nothing to worry about there then. Which, yeah, I mean, alarm bells ringing all the way through, and I don't think that's appropriate way for a school to go. That's like so in the past anyway, and I don't think we want to start bringing, personally, I don't think we want to start bringing physical punishment back into schools. It can only be abused, and it's not the school's way to treat things in that way. But they started to move on, so I'd no disagreements there, but they started to move on to the general business then of smacking, I suppose you'd say. And the first thing that I found really interesting was that Kevin especially, Kevin loves his language, right? He loves to get the key terms in, right? And he loves to keep hammering in you with those terms. If you've done something he regards you as a racist, he'll the racist Noel Plum, the racist no, you know, he hasn't called me a racist, but that's what he's like, or rapist, or racist, or whatever, and keep hitting it with that. And he knows the game, because that's a political game that people play, right? You do that. You get those key words, those key terms that have that are loaded terms, and you just keep hitting them with those terms. And the terms that he used here was beating and physical assault, right? This was what he was talking about. It's beating, it's physical assault, and that's what he called it all the way through, which is interesting, really. What we're doing is we're playing a game where we're using the terms that we would apply to an adult in that position, to a child in that position. We're not providing an argument as to why it's wrong, and there are studies into it and the damage that can be done by it, but it's not related to using the terms beating and physical assault or whatever. It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with actually what can go on and the dangers of it and all that lot. They're two totally different things, but he loves to play that game. The interesting thing for me with regard to that was that Kristi said that she's more in favour of what's a modern approach, which is the naughty step or the naughty space or whatever, the naughty mat. And that's what we've tried to employ with our child, who's nearly 4 now. And most of the time, I have smacked him, and I'll explain that and why I think that it's a good thing to be able to have that as a responsible parent, and why I think that banning it entirely is effectively punishing responsible parents. You're treating every parent as if they're the worst parent. But I'll come on to that in a minute. We've tried to employ the naughty step, and now he's nearly 4. Hopefully we'll never have to smack him again now, because he's quite a reasonable lad, and you can get the messages across that you need to get across without recourse to that. But it's interesting. If you want to start using that language, what the naughty step consists of is if the child has done something that requires chastisement, that requires either a punishment or a reaffirming that you're setting down the laws, right, and that law has been transgressed, which is effectively what you're doing. Whereas a smack, if you're going to describe a smack as beating them, really what you're doing with a naughty step, if you're again going to put it in adult terms, is you're trying to mentally break them down. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to psychologically crush them, psychologically crush the child. Effectively, you're relying on the fact that the child will break down psychologically before you do. And the way that you do it is you put the child there and you leave the child there, and you won't allow the child to leave until the child has apologised and the child has admitted that they've done wrong, whether or not they think they've done wrong. They have to say that they've done wrong. And if they get off the step, you put them back again. And if they get off the step, you put them back again. And effectively what you're doing is you keep doing that until you break the child's will. Doesn't sound so nice when you frame it in that way, does it? When you use that kind of language, I kind of feel bad saying it, because that's what I do. It doesn't sound a very nice thing. to do. So that's why I kind of have a problem with that kind of language, because there's actually no way that you can discipline a child where you can't use language which makes it sound absolutely abhorrent, and how would anybody do that to another human being? And I do think there's circumstances actually where my lad's dug his heels in, where we've adopted that approach, and I think it's maybe caused him more pain, more distress than a quick smack would have done, quite honestly. That may have just drawn a line under it. He'd have had a quick cry, would have had a hug, it'd have all been over, whereas he's really tried, no, I'm going to try and beat mummy and daddy on this. I'm going to get my way, I'm going to keep going. And it's caused him so much distress, it's taken hours, really. But what can you do if you don't win that battle? Then it just happens again and again and again, and that is what the parenting guide sees. If you lose it, they think, well, if I wait this out for 15 minutes, if I fight for 15 minutes, mummy and daddy gives in, and so they will fight for 15 minutes, and they'll be distressed for 15 minutes, and so next time it has to go on for 20 minutes, and if you crack at 20 minutes, then they'll think, well, I can last for 20 minutes. It doesn't sound nice. And it isn't, actually. I don't know, maybe in the future there'll be some studies into the stress, the mental distress that causes. But that was the first of the points, really, that this idea of beating or physically assaulting, you can portray any of these things and make them sound absolutely terrible, really. And that was the first thing. The second thing was, we're just talking about smacking. I've done it before, this naughty step approach and other approaches, and they don't always work, first off, and that's the point of it, is that you keep doing it. There are some situations where, and this is where I don't like the idea of a smacking ban. I know some countries have them. I don't know how it works in those countries where the parents just think, well, I'm going to have to bite the bullet and smack my child anyway. There are some situations where you really can't allow your child to do what they've done again. One thing with my child was, my little lad, as soon as he learnt to toddle, he kept toddling into the kitchen trying to turn the gas on the hob. And I don't think you need me to explain to you how dangerous that is. And twice he turned the knob on, didn't light it, so there was just unlit gas. And he's trying to press all the buttons. Every possibility, if we weren't there, if we just happened, because life is as it is, you know. You can say, well, you should have your eyes on your child 24 hours a day, every minute. Just doesn't work like that. And you can't always annex off the kitchen because you're keeping your eye on your child and you're trying to prepare their food, prepare their milk, do whatever you're doing. So you do your very best, but sometimes your child creeps up behind you and they've done something so easy to turn a knob on a cooker, walk off. You walk off, don't realise. If you've ever tried to light the gas and left a bit of a delay, even if it takes you 10 or 15 seconds to light that gas, you get a little bit of a fucking explosion. You imagine if the child's playing there for 2 or 3 minutes and then hits the ignition button, manages to strike the ignition button. I don't want my child suffering burns that he's going to have for the rest of his life. I don't want him to blow the house up. I don't want him to kill us all. So for me, the idea of, well, let's take the chance and we'll go with the naughty step approach. I tried it. The first time he did it, I gave him a very stern telling off. Don't you ever do that again. Don't you touch that. Didn't work. So he did it a second time, and the second time I give him a firm smack on the hand, and I told him, I used a voice and a face that I think scared him, and he cried. And I don't like doing that, and I don't feel a sort of flush of pride that I scared him. It doesn't take a lot to scare a 2-year-old child. But it lasted 5 minutes. I gave him a cuddle, everything was lovely, and he was fine about it, and he hasn't tried to do it again. And I wouldn't do that any differently. And I think there are situations like that. Children that run out on the road, try and run out and won't listen to you just telling them, reasoning with them not to, or sitting them down on a fucking naughty step, right? There are some things which they cannot be allowed to fuck up on for their own safety. And I think those are situations where you need to be able to show the child, to shock them that this is really fucking bad, right? And that is where I think physical chastisement and actually scaring your child a little bit isn't a bad thing, because it's the lesser of two evils there. That was the point that I wanted to make with that, and it didn't chime in particularly with what they were talking about with this thing in the USA at this school, but they were talking more generally about smacking, as if there's just no situation where it's justified, which to me then means risk it. If your kid blows your house up, if they end up burnt for the rest of their life, that's the lesser of two evils, when clearly it isn't. The last thing was the bit that Kristi said, and this was maybe the bit that motivated me to make the video, because it was one of the most stupid and ill-considered fucking things that I've heard for a long time, really. It was like every facet of it. It was wrong at both ends. What she said was, she said she'd heard this little adage and she just thought it was absolutely right and she wanted to... So she'd obviously given it some fucking thought. It wasn't just something she said on the spur of the moment. What she said is, if a child is too young to be reasoned with, smacking won't work, and if a child's old enough to be reasoned with, there's no point smacking them. Which is one of the most illogical, stupid fucking things I've ever heard. I mean, on the idea first that if a child's too old enough to be reasoned with, there's no need to smack them. I would hope that you can use other forms of chastisement, but not because you can reason with them. Reasoning with your child is not in lieu of chastisement and potentially punishment any more than it is for fucking adults. You can reason with adults. We still have laws. We still send people to prison. We don't just say, well, you can reason with people and explain to them why you shouldn't murder someone. So why would you need to lock people away anymore? Just explain to them. It doesn't work for fucking adults. Why the fuck would it work for children just because they're old enough to reason with? I'm a firm believer in reasoning. My father especially was big on that with me and my two sisters. I think it worked better with me than it did with my sisters, to be honest. One of my sisters particularly, he always said that actually that the reasoning process could go on for hours as she got older, and she just got more and more unhappy. And actually sometimes a smack, he smacked her when she was older. I don't know, I don't really want to go down that line, but he smacked her in her sort of early teens, I think, would have just solved the problem. Because when he did smack her, maybe not early teens, but 8 or 9, something like that. And because then she would just have a quick cry, and then it would be as if everything was reset, whereas instead it could go on for hours or days, the sulking and the depression as a result of these discussions and arguments. But he was big on reasoning and trying to make you understand why you weren't allowed to do something or had to do something. But the reasoning was supplemental to the discipline and the rules, right? So you've still got to have the rules. And just because I can't convince my child, you need to go to nursery this morning. No, I don't, Daddy, I stay with you. But I've got to go to work. No, you don't, Daddy. Yes, I do, because you understand I have to earn money to buy the food. Yes, Daddy, but don't go today. I have to go. I can't ring them up. Yes, Daddy. Tell them you're not... It shouldn't bang. I can't ring work up and say I've had a word with my 3-year-old, but he's just not having it. So I'm going to have to stay here because I can't convince him. It doesn't fucking work like that. He's old enough to reason with, but I make the fucking decision at the end of the day. And if he transgresses that, then there has to be some chastisement, potentially some to show him these are the limits, and potentially some punishment for transgressing. That might not be physical chastisement. It might be a naughty step or something else, or right, you're not having any sweets, or you're not playing on the tablet, or whatever. But that's not because you can reason with him. Reason hasn't supplanted that. There's nothing to do with the fucking reasoning part of it. So that was just absolute crap was that. I just couldn't believe how fucking illogical. But then at the other end, if a child is too young to reason with, smacking won't work. So if a child's too young to reason with, just let them do anything then. Because anything, if you say no, don't do that, if you wag your finger at them, if you shake your head, if you show disapproval, that's not going to work because they're too young to reason with. What? That's just absolute crap on its face. That's absolute crap. That you can stop your child from doing things and make them realise what to you is acceptable and what is not acceptable. You can give them an idea of what the rules are long before you can reason with them. That's absolute shit to suggest that until you can reason with your child, smacking wouldn't work, because if that was the case, then none of these other forms of fucking chastisement would work. There's absolutely no reason. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, and Kristi didn't give any evidence there, and she also didn't give anything to differentiate physical chastisement from any other form of chastisement. It was just absolute crap. And as I say, I have no problem with people who haven't had children talking about it, but at least make it sound like you fucking thought about it, right? At least make it sound like you've thought it through with the statements that you make. That really scared me, that somebody would say, this is something that I've heard in the past, so obviously I've given it some thought about, and I'm going to repeat it to you because it makes so much fucking sense, when it doesn't. And I hope it doesn't really matter what your position is, dear viewer, on smacking, because it shouldn't. There are good arguments against smacking, and in most circumstances I buy them. It's only really in certain circumstances that I reserve that. But whatever your position on smacking is, I think you can... The reasons for not smacking are not the reasons that were given there. It's a totally different fucking basket of reasons, the actual arguments that it relies upon. Okay, right, that's it. That's pretty much what I wanted to say. Okay, I'm interested to know what you think. Bye for now.